And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks. Episode 25. Starting out this week with Caravan Vigil. 1 green mana sorcery. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it in your hand. Then shuffle your library. Not particularly great, however, it has Morbid. You may put that card onto the battlefield instead of putting it in your hand if a creature died this turn. I had this card recommended to me by one of my viewers, and I was like, yeah, you know what? That's actually pretty good. 1 mana to put a land into your hand, that's not fantastic, but 1 mana to put a basic land directly into play untapped, of course, is fantastic. You just got to make sure a creature's dying. So if you're in a deck where you are having creatures die all the time, this card can be pretty darn good. Coming in at number 2, Charmed Pendant. 4 mana artifact. Tap, mill a card. For each colored mana symbol in the milled card's mana cost, add 1 mana of that color. Activate only as an instant. This is a very unique, unusual card that I've been trying to find a place for a long time. And it has this reminder text on it. And I would just like to point out, this card can get played in any deck. Okay, it is an artifact. Even though it has those blue and black mana symbols on it, just like with Extort, if there are mana symbols in the reminder text, that doesn't count in a commander deck. So the reminder text says, for example, if the card's mana cost is 3 blue, blue, black, you may add blue, blue, black. So basically you want the more mana symbols, the better. The actual mana value of the card is meaningless. What you want is lots of those pips. However, I'm thinking this is sort of a way to mill yourself and also inadvertently a mana rock. So if you're in a deck where you want to mill yourself anyway, isn't this going to be a great inclusion? Like I'm thinking maybe a Sidisi deck, or possibly my Egon deck where I want to be milling all the time. I mean, it only mills 1 card, which isn't great for a 4 mana artifact, but the added bonus of maybe I'm going to get a bunch of mana on top of that, you're also adding the mana that is that card. So again, if I'm in my Egon deck and I mill my Lich, for example, into the graveyard, that's 4 black mana that I'm going to get. That's pretty darn good. Obviously, this card's going to be a lot better if you know what's on top of your library. And again, in that Sidisi deck, I've talked about this a lot lately, I really want to know what's on top of my library that I'm milling. So I'm going to put stuff in there where I can look at the top card of my library and manipulate it so that then I can mill something that's going to give me lots of mana. So maybe a good fit there. Just a very unique, unusual card. Coming in at number 3, another very unique, unusual card and a very fun card, Choice of Damnations. 5 and a black, sorcery, arcane sorcery. Target opponent chooses a number. You may have that player lose that much life. If you don't, that player sacrifices all but that many permanents. Very interesting card, really fun card in a commander game, I think. I had a patron actually who wanted me to build an entire deck around this card because they just thought it was so much fun. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to choose an opponent, and that opponent is going to choose a number. Okay, so they want to choose a number that I guess is sort of in the middle. So let's say they choose 10. You may have that player lose that much life, so they can lose 10 life. If they don't, so it's up to you, right? They choose the number, but then you decide what happens after. And if you don't want them to lose the life, that player sacrifices all but that many permanents. So basically, the bigger number they choose, the more likely you're going to have them lose life. So if they choose 20, you're going to have them lose 20 life because they probably don't even have 20 permanents. So they'll be able to keep everything. If they choose 5, now you'll say, okay, well, losing 5 life isn't really that good for 6 mana. You're going to sacrifice all your permanents except for 5. Obviously, because this is an expensive card, you're going to want to wait till later in the game. So if you wait till later in the game when your opponents have lots of permanents and a lot less life likely, now it gets really sticky, right? So if your opponent only has 10 life and you choose this, now what are they going to do? Now it's going to be a real Choice of Damnations. Very interesting name for this card. I love it a lot. It can be tons of fun in a commander game. Coming in at number 4, Sentinel Flute. 5 mana artifact. Hey X, search your library for a creature card with mana value X or less. Reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle. That's it. I mentioned this in my top 10 colorless tutors video. It's just a way to tutor for creatures in any color, which I really, really like cards like that. Obviously, green does that fantastically, but if you're in any deck where you're not playing green, maybe you want to search for creatures. I mean, black has the tutors that search for everything, so maybe you probably don't play it in a black deck either. So I guess a red, white, or blue deck where you can't really search for creatures, here's a great option for you. If there's certain creatures, if you just have a creature-heavy deck where you want to go creatures, or if there's specific creatures that you want to go get, like I had put this in my Go Tribal deck because there was some very specific creatures that I wanted to go get out of my deck. So it worked really good there. Just a great option for you if you want to tutor for creatures in any color that doesn't do it very well. Coming in at number 5, City of Solitude, 3 and a green enchantment. Players can cast spells and activate abilities only during their own turns. Very, very powerful effect. Really shuts off a lot of strategy, and that's why this card is really expensive. It gets played in CDH a lot. It's just a great card if you just want to be left alone on your turn. Obviously, this affects you, so you're not going to be able to do stuff on your opponent's turns either. But if you just have stuff that you want to do on your turn and you don't want to be interrupted by either spells or abilities, this is a great card. Coming in at number 6, Cloak and Dagger, 2 mana, tribal artifact rogue equipment. So this is a tribal equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has Shroud. Whenever a rogue enters the battlefield, you may attach Cloak and Dagger to it. I really like this card, and I think it should get played a lot more. It gets played in a few decks for sure, but this is very comparable to Steely Resolve. How I talk about Steely Resolve doesn't have to get played in a tribal deck. You play it in any deck where you don't want people touching your commander. You want your commander to come and play and just be left alone. It gives protection as soon as it enters the battlefield. Yes, it's Shroud and you can't touch it, but if you're in a deck where you don't want to be doing that, then you don't have to worry about it. Cloak and Dagger is that exact same thing except for only rogues. I mean, there is the minute instant there where your commander enters the battlefield and this triggers and is going to attach to your commander and your opponents can respond. So maybe not quite as good as Steely Resolve, but it's definitely good in any of those decks where you want to be protecting your commander. There are 29 rogue commanders in the format. 29. So again, just like I say about with a lot of these other cards, check your commander's creature type. Maybe your commander is a rogue and you don't even know it. And this is just a great way to protect your commander. It also gives +2/+0, which can be significant. But for me, I'm putting this in my deck because I play my commander. This immediately attaches to it and now my opponents can't remove it. Coming in at number 7, Close Quarters, 2 red enchantment. Whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, Close Quarters deals 1 damage to any target. I just really love these cards. This is why I mention enchantments a lot. They often have passive effects that you don't have to pay for. You play it and it just does work for you. And in any deck where you're attacking a lot, this can be fantastic. And also in any deck where you don't want your creatures to be blocked, maybe in a deck where you want your creatures to be blocked. It works either way because being able to throw around damage everywhere is going to be fantastic. In any deck like a goblin deck, I mean, if you're playing a goblin deck and you're going to throw 20 goblins at your opponent, any of the goblins that they block are now going to be doing 1 damage to them anyway, or 1 damage to any other target. So really it's a lose-lose for them. So I think this goes great in any deck where you're swarming your opponent with lots of 1/1 creatures. I think it goes great in any deck where you want to discourage your opponents from blocking maybe, but also goes good in any deck where you want your creatures to be blocked because now you can throw some extra damage around. Coming in at number 8, Cloud Cover, 2 a white and a blue enchantment. Whenever another permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, you may return that permanent to owner's hand. Man, this card is fantastic in a commander game. You know, again, talk about enchantments that have these passive effects. It just sits there, and anytime your opponent wants to remove something of yours, you can instead just return it to your hand. That seems pretty great. You know, it's a may, so if for any reason you don't want to return it to your hand, I guess you can just let it die. Anytime an opponent wants to remove anything of yours, be it an enchantment, a land, maybe you have a land out that is really powerful that you don't want to get to remove, now you can just return it to your hand and play it the next turn. Obviously your commander, now you can return it to your hand and just play it the next turn. Really, this card can go in just about any deck. I don't know if I've ever seen it in a commander game, and it is very, very usable. Coming in at number 9, Cold Storage, 4 mana artifact. And the original text on this card is very confusing, obviously, because the game was very different back then. You're no longer putting target creature you control on cold storage. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. The errata says you pay 3 colorless mana, exile target creature you control. And then at any time you can sacrifice cold storage and return each creature exiled with it to the battlefield under your control. So there's a lot of ways to use this card. The first way is it's great for blinking. I had put this in my Nadir and Miara deck because now I can exile my Nadir, I get those tokens, and then I can bring it back at any time. And you don't have to worry about your commander staying in exile, I suppose, unless your opponent has a Krosan Grip. That would be the only instance, because this is just sacrifice at instant speed whenever you want. So you don't typically have to worry about losing those creatures. So this is a great way to blink creatures if you're in a color that doesn't blink very well. It's also great if you just want to save creatures. It's another way to protect your stuff. If you have your commander out and your opponents are always trying to remove it, just pay 3 mana, you can save it and bring it back. Again, if you're in a color that isn't very good at saving creatures, right? White is really good at protecting your own creatures. Green's pretty good at it too. There's some colors that aren't very good at that. Red in particular is not very good at protecting your own creatures. And also the really tricky way to use this is you can steal your opponent's creatures with it, right? That first ability is exile target creature you control. So I can steal an opponent's creature, say if I'm playing that Yasova deck, and then after I've stolen a few of their creatures, I can sacrifice my cold storage and return each creature card exiled with it to the battlefield under your control, not owner's control. That's the important wording there. So all those creatures that I just stole, I can return them to play, and now they are permanently under my control. So a lot of different ways to use this card. I think it definitely goes in a few decks. And lastly today, Kolfiners Earn. Very unique and unusual card. 3 mana artifact. Whenever a creature with toughness 4 or greater is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may exile it. Right away, it's a may. That's always important. It's not a must, it's a may. At the beginning of the end step, if there are 3 or more cards that have been exiled with Kolfiners Earn, sacrifice it. If you do, return those cards to the battlefield under your control. That's pretty fantastic. So if you're in any deck where you have, I guess, lots of big creatures, when they die, you can now exile them and then sacrifice your Kolfiners Earn at the beginning of the next end step and return them to play. A board wipe maybe kills all your creatures. They all get exiled at the same time with this if they're toughness 4 or greater, and at the beginning of the end step, you return them all to play. So pretty great board wipe protection if you got big creatures. Also, you can get into some shenanigans here. So if one of the creatures I've exiled is, say, a Sun Titan, now that Sun Titan comes back into play, and I can return my Kolfiners Earn to play and keep doing that over and over. So you can get into some shenanigans here where you're sacrificing your own creatures. I think that's probably the best way to use this. In a deck where I'm sacrificing my own creatures, getting them back, this triggers at the beginning of the end step, which means at the beginning of each end step. So now I can sacrifice a bunch of stuff, and one of those things is, say, a Sun Titan, get back the Kolfiners Earn, and maybe the other 2 creatures are creatures that also have ETB effects possibly. And then on my opponent's turn, I can do it again, get the Kolfiners Earn back again. This would be an absolute perfect fit in my Gerard deck, because in my Gerard deck, I'm doing a lot of sacrificing my own creatures and sacrificing my own artifacts. And I can get this back out of the graveyard with, say, a Goblin Welder, except the toughness 4 or greater thing doesn't work. I don't have that many creatures in my deck with toughness 4 or greater, so I don't know if it works. I actually do have Sun Titan in that deck as well. It's just that I don't know if I have enough to get that toughness 4 or greater. Getting 3 creatures exiled with toughness 4 or greater would be really tough in that deck. But in a lot of decks, I think this definitely works. Even just great board wipe protection. I have a deck with a lot of big creatures. It's good for board wipe protection. Definitely an interesting card that I think can go in a lot of decks. And that is 10 cards that you should be putting in your commander decks. And that is it for today. Thanks for tuning in.